Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark McNack, and my co-host Robert Branton are joined today by Nicole Bourque-Bouchier, CEO and co-owner of the Bouchier Group, one of Canada's largest privately owned Indigenous companies with close to $200 million in annual revenues and nearly 1,500 employees operating in Alberta's oil sands region. Nicole and her colleagues have built something remarkable, from a single bulldozer and a devastating first-year loss to a company that's been working with Canadian natural resources for 28 years, maintaining zero default performance while employing Indigenous workers from over 100 different First Nations across the country. In December 2024 alone, she received personally the Order of Canada and collectively the ExxonMobil International Diverse Supplier Award, a global recognition that the Bouchier Group earned by competing successfully against thousands of international contractors on service quality, safety, and operational performance. This conversation reflects resilience and ambition. Nicole is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Canada. She's the CEO of this business that she's built with her partner, and she is an Indigenous female. She proves Indigenous-led businesses succeed on merit, alliances, and good partnership, which is good business for everyone. Let's dive in.
Nicole Bourque-Bouchier, the CEO of the Bouchier Group. Thanks so much for joining us, taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, wonderful to have you here. A great entrepreneur from Alberta in Canada. And your story, Nicole, is, I think, inspiring for all Canadians, and I'm sure Indigenous people around the world. So we're very, very pleased to have you on our podcast.
Thank you.
Rob, why don't you kick things off?
Sure, Nicole, maybe just start, you talk to us about where you are today. Where are you speaking to us from?
Oh, yes. The sun is shining, and I'm sitting in my office, which is the Bouchier office on the Fort McMurray Reserve. It's called the Business Incubator Park, and it's for their local entrepreneurs. And we have finally had the privilege of building our very own building about 3 years ago. And so I'm just looking out at our yard right now and all the snow. It's been rather cold up here, but just looking at our fleet of equipment right now.
Great. And can you help position that for our audience over here in London and Europe who probably haven't had the opportunity to visit your neighborhood?
Fort McMurray itself is one of 6 First Nation communities in the heart of oil sands in northeastern Alberta within Canada.
And you grew up not too far from there. Tell us a little bit about where you were born. And
Sure. Yeah, I was actually born in the Northwest Territories, so even more north from here. So Northwest Territories is just north of Alberta in a small community called Fort Smith. And my parents raised me and 3 sisters on the trapline in the Wood Buffalo National Park, which is in between Alberta and Northwest Territories, for the first 5 years of my life. And then we moved into a small community, Fort Smith, to go to school. And then later on, when my dad was offered a position within the oil sands industry in a larger city called Fort McMurray, just south of Fort Smith, he relocated our family, very young family, down to Fort McMurray, and he took a job with a company called Syncrude Canada, which was mining in early mining stages within the Wood Buffalo area within northeastern Alberta.
And I'm curious about this, raised on the trap lines. Just explain what you mean by by that.
Indigenous people within Canada in our early days, that's how we made a living, is living on a trap line and trapping the animals. And we would sell portions, usually the furs from the animals. And that's how we would, bring in revenue and an income as a family. And so as that way of life started to go away, many of our Indigenous people, my father included, really tried to hang on to that wonderful traditional way of life and still raise their families. Today, there's very few families that actually make a living on the trapline because, the fur trade is just not existent anymore, and it's really hard to get money from it. So many of us practice traditional activities just because it's what we enjoy. As Indigenous people, we love to be out in the lands. We love to be within nature. It's kind of what brings us back rooted into our communities. And, today my husband and I and our children practice our traditional way of life, and we have our own trapline.
Okay. And what sort of animals are found along your trapline? Canada's a huge country.
Oh, yeah. So in the Wood Buffalo National Park, buffalo, and they're very difficult to come by. They're almost extinct, so a lot harder to come by. So when you do, it's a very sacred moment, actually, to be able to see them. We have a lot of moose, we have caribou, we have a lot of deer, we have rabbits, and the list goes on and on up here. There is a lot.
Wow. So I remember growing up in Manitoba, and I used to go to Riding Mountain National Park, and there's buffalo up there on the plateau, and to see those animals is always beautiful. And whenever, from a kid, we go out to see them without having the deep appreciation that an Indigenous person has for what those animals mean. But when you see them, even without that, you feel that there's something very powerful and life-giving. When you see them, you just think, tread carefully, not because you're afraid of them, but because they represent something.
I think life-giving is a great way of putting it, because years ago when we lived on a trapline and that was your way of living, every animal that you came across provided so much to the family. So whether it was the fur for the warmth or the meat for the food, but you didn't put any animal to waste. And even today, when we go to look to hunt as a family, in our culture, you take exactly only what you need. And you also share with the rest of the community. You share with your elders, you share with your other family members. So you may have one or two hunters within the family, but they definitely spread the wealth around amongst all families.
It's such a beautiful part of the country. And my daughter taught for a few years in Hay River.
Nice. Not
too far from there. I got the chance to visit there a few times and was always struck by the beauty. Can you talk a little bit about your education then, and how did you end up running Bouchier Group?
Sure. As I said, my father moved us down to Fort McMurray, and it's interesting. I kind of chuckle when I hear his story, because he ran a taxi service with his family when he moved us into Fort Smith, a very small northern community, and he was called by Syncrude, and he tells the story not once, not twice, but 3 times. Syncrude Canada at the time was standing up their oil sands operations, and they really wanted to work with Indigenous people from the region, from the First Nations around them, in order to build skills and help provide for communities. And so they called him a few times, and at the very end, he decided to come. And he says, I decided to move south with my daughters to the big city of Fort McMurray, because I really just wanted to provide them with a different way of life that wasn't as hard as how he had it raised on a trapline, trying to make ends meet. And really, survival was what you put in physically out in the cold every day. And so he wanted to give us an opportunity for education. So he moved the 4 girls and my mom down to the Fort McMurray area. And Fort McMurray was home, and it's been home since. I went to elementary and high school here in Fort McMurray. And then a little later on, I was able to relocate to his home community, Fort Chipewyan. Fort Chipewyan is on the lakes of Athabasca. It's a fly-in only community on the Canadian Shield. It's beautiful, and that's where his First Nation was from. And so my parents relocated up there, back up north, in between Fort Smith and Fort McMurray, and I relocated with them and worked a bit and upgraded my high school education, and then moved to Edmonton, Alberta, to take some computer classes. I ended up with a diploma in computer information systems, and then moved back to Fort McMurray and started my career as a student within Syncrude, Canada, where my father used to work in their public affairs department. And that was my first kind of brush of working right within oil sands. And later on started my own consulting company, where I provided stakeholder database solutions to industry companies in the area as a way to contact key Indigenous and governmental stakeholders with information about their projects. And then that kind of grew into eventually what worked out to be a full-time job back in oil sands with a company called Shell Canada. And within Shell's company, I was an advisor in their external affairs department. And during that time, my husband-to-be, David, who's from the community of Fort McMurray First Nation, worked at the same site, and that's how we met each other. And we both had very full-time jobs, and David happened to have a very small company called Candave Contracting on the side with a couple of pieces of equipment that he ran at a new exploration site that was called Canadian Natural Resources Horizon Project just north of Fort McMurray. So we were across the river on this great big site called Albion, run by Shell Canada. I worked directly for Shell, and he worked for Fort McMurray Group of Companies. And work across the river at the Canadian Natural site through his two little pieces of equipment started to become more and more full-time. And I found myself diving into the books, into the safety side of things, into the payroll side of things. And work just became very full-time for both of us. So we had our full-time jobs during the day, weekends and evenings, and we had children, became also very full-time. So we made the very hard decision, as entrepreneurs have to do along their journey, to just jump in with both feet. And we gave up our full-time positions, and we thought, we talked to ourselves about what is the absolute worst that could happen if we did this. And we figured the worst that could happen is we'd fall flat on our face. And we felt we were fairly employable, so we would go get jobs of equal back. And you know what? We've never looked back since.
So what years are we talking about when you made that decision?
Yeah, 2004. 2004 and 2005 were the first, the big winter season. And winter season was really important to our business because that's where exploration was done, because you have to have the cold weather to freeze down winter roads, to move drill rigs in, to be able to drill for the materials to then assess the level of bitumen within the ground.
Right.
What a story. A few questions going back. Syncrude Canada, when you talked about your father and they're looking to engage with the local community, was Syncrude Canada, I guess it was one of the few enlightened corporations in those days who knew the importance of working with the Indigenous people.
Yes, they definitely took a lead role in our region. And of course, Syncrude is now Suncor Energy across Canada. But they definitely always took a leadership role with working with Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. It was a priority for them when it was a priority for nobody else. So we're very lucky.
Yes. And just fast forwarding to, you're talking about, in the winter, that's when you can bring in the heavy equipment and the drill rigs. Does the drilling also take place in the winter, or it's set up for the summer and then the drilling takes place in the summer when perhaps the land is a bit easier to?
Oh, it takes place in the winter. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we have these condensed exploration programs that we have to do because the land out here is so soft. There's a lot of muskeg areas. So you wait for the winter, you actually put water on the roads and freeze down the lines, and then you open up the roads and you build pads for the drill rigs to then come behind you and sit on. And then they sit there and drill for 3-4 months in the winter and get what they need to then go back in the summer and to analyze and assess.
Wow. What a
Mhm.
story.
And I'm just curious, what became of that exploration site at that time?
We
It
did
was a
so many.
CNL.
Yeah, we did. Well, CNRL now is, I think, the largest producer in Canada. We're still on the site. We've been on the site since day one. It's been over 25 years we've been there. Dave's had his company 28 years ago. He started it. And then I joined a few years after he started it. And upon joining the organization, Dave signed over half the company to me right from the get-go. So it's very much been a true partnership, Boucher, 50% owners each, and a lot of challenges along the way.
Yes. And not only are you one of the great entrepreneurs in Canada, and your husband as well, you built a very sizable business. I think it's 170 million plus in terms of revenues. You are also a woman and Indigenous at a time that was not exactly the role model for having a successful career. So you've obviously demonstrated to a number of people, don't judge before you see.
100%. Yeah, I say that when I entered in the oil sands area and took on this role, I didn't even know what the difference was between each piece of equipment. So it was a huge learning curve for me, one that I was, bound and determined to figure out. It did not come with a lot of listening, learning, and diving in. And each day, brought its own challenges, but equally as so, its own learnings. And it was very rewarding, and always has been. Each day is very rewarding for me as an entrepreneur. I learned a lot from both my husband, David, and my father entered the business too. So he eventually left his term with Syncrude Canada and came to work for us directly. And so between the two of them, being longtime operators themselves, I was just like a sponge taking it all in out there, putting on steel toe boots and a hard hat, which I had never done before, and then just jumping in with both feet and doing what I can to fill the gaps and help out till I finally established myself as more of a CEO position within the organization. It didn't happen overnight. A lot of challenges along the way, but just taking it all in and learning, and a completely 100% self-taught in business.
Fantastic.
Give us an idea of what the business looks like today.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'd love to. We just closed the 2025 year at just over $200 million and just under 1,400 team members within our organization. We have a diverse business of 3 companies, so we continue our work on that civil side of things with Boucher Contracting, which is our road maintenance and civil projects business. And then along the way, we stood up a business called Boucher Site Services, which is our integrated facility maintenance company. So we have a lot of tradespeople working within buildings on sites, helping with the building's maintenance, and doing project work as well, like dorm renovations for the camps up here. And then more recently, we started a 3rd division, which we call Boucher Logistics. We have bus drivers working at site. We do low bedding services for different clientele. We have 39% Indigenous employees. And the thing I'm most excited about, or the stat I'm most excited about, is of our just under 1,400 employees, 41% of our leaders are Indigenous. We represent over 99 Indigenous communities across Canada. So, and over about 400 pieces of heavy equipment. And, we spend a lot of time in community giving back as well, which I'm also very proud of.
Very, very impressive figures. But as you said, you've worked very hard over the years from the get-go, and I think the first couple years were a bit challenging. And you had talked about, what do you do if it doesn't work? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's important for our listeners. All entrepreneurs know, it's not an easy road. It looks like it in the end when you're successful, and people forget about the hardship and sacrifice along the way. Would you share a bit more of that, please?
100%. Yeah. The first year of business, when I said we both quit our jobs and dived in, we barely seen our kids. Dave missed Christmas that year. You're you're chief cook and bottle washer for sure. As entrepreneurs, you do everything to save money. You're trying to learn the business. You're trying to learn the commercial side of things, what a contract means. How do you get within a contract? How do you get more work? How do you manage your expenses? You don't pay them out right away. We didn't have a full-time bookkeeper. We worked extremely hard. We were exhausted. We closed our year end in March. At the time was our year end. And we had gotten married through that first year, and we were on our honeymoon in Mexico. And I knew our year end was coming through, and I was so excited because we had such a challenging first year, and I knew how hard we all worked. And so I said, well, I'm going to go to the computer and log in to see how we did, because the auditors were sending me the results. And I just scrolled to the bottom because I didn't know enough on how to read financial statements, but I knew the bottom line would tell me. And there was a great big red minus $250,000 at the very bottom. And my heart sank. And I just thought, what did we do wrong? Right. So we ended up a very hard year. We thought we were doing really good month on month. Our accountant or bookkeeper at the time was telling us we were. And we ended up at a $250,000 loss. So,
wow. And that's in 1999 or $2,000, right?
Yeah, that was in the 2005 year. Yeah, $250,000. So, you know what? I think that first year of loss taught me one huge thing, and that was discipline. And it was discipline around growth, discipline around knowing your own business. I think I went in thinking, oh, well, the bookkeeper knows the numbers. I don't have to worry about that. And the mechanics know the maintenance. I don't have to worry about that. But the truth is, as an entrepreneur, you have to make every aspect of your business, right? You have to know a little bit about all of it. And you have to, follow, for me as a female, I've learned to follow my intuition, to be honest with you, because most often than not, it is completely always dead on and right. And every time I see myself veering away from that and trying to live in a different world, like as an Indigenous female in a construction environment, I spent the first few years trying to measure up and be like the guys, the construction guy. And it just wasn't serving me. I was struggling. And it's really when, as a female, I just leaned into what I brought to the table, which I think is that discipline. It was the empathy. It was the intuition. And the more I just started to listen to myself and go with it. And, it was a little against the grain in kind of a guy's construction world, but it's worked out well at the end of the day, I think. So I'm quite proud.
Quite clearly.
So I'm quite proud of what we've built along the way.
We should probably go back and interview some of those long-serving employees to see how they've seen the leadership evolve in the company. And boy, maybe they underestimated what would happen. But that is something. And what a surprise, though. You're on your break. You've worked hard for the year, and you thought in the middle of your nice end of your honeymoon vacation, I'll just go check the numbers. So hopefully you were able to at least celebrate and overcome that loss somehow and enjoy the few days you had left on the warm weather before you came back to rebuild the business, right?
Right, exactly. We managed.
Yes, great.
And I suppose you don't get through periods of financial loss or other setbacks without some important partners and supports along the way. Have you had some key partners who've helped make the business as successful as it's become?
Yeah, most definitely. We're quite lucky to have Fort McMurray First Nation and their group of companies, which earlier employed my husband, David, support us along the way. They helped us in any way they could. A specific gentleman by the name of Jim Carberry, and of course at the time there was a chief by the name of Chief Jim Bouchier, and together they were a bit of a team building the Fort McMurray group up on its own at all the oil sands sites here. But they definitely lent a hand. They were our fuel provider for all of our equipment. And so they allowed us to go extra months without paying them, that with that coming out of that first lost year, in order to kind of gain our revenue back up. And then alongside them was this phenomenal company called Finning Canada. And they provided us all of our yellow iron, our heavy gear. We're still with both today, but Finning did the same thing. They allowed us to spread out our payments amongst several months in order for us to get caught up. And then we had a local bank, the Alberta Treasury branch, step in. And so those three partners really got us by that coming out of that really hard year. They were able to really help us turn things around and give us a little leeway. We never asked for anything for free. We just asked that, can you give us an extra couple months to pay you? And they were able to do that. And so we kind of went back in and learned what we had done wrong. And, there was a lot of expenses that we didn't track POs against. And so it was, like I said, it was a really hard lesson, but with the right partners. And then I have to say we consider our clients our partners. We started at CNRL and we're still Canadian Natural Resources at the Horizon site, and 28 years later, and we're still at that site. And same goes for Syncrude Energy and Imperial Oil. We're still at all their sites. So it's really nice. It's really nice to be able to see your clients as partners as well.
And is the business focused around oil sands sites? Is that your specialty, or is there enough work, or do you see branching out beyond that, those types of?
The business has definitely organically grown through the oil sands clients and also the city of Fort McMurray through what we call the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo. We've been able to do road maintenance services for them as well, predominantly within our rural communities. And then on a growth plan, we would like to grow the integrated facility maintenance side of the business outside of Wood Buffalo. Last year, we were just able to get a footprint in the Edmonton, Alberta area through facility maintenance, through EPCOR Energy, and also with the government directly. So we are doing some smaller facility maintenance work right now in the Edmonton area, and we'll continue to grow the civil projects end because there is a lot of work to be done still here in Wood Buffalo on the civil end, especially when you take a mine site to closure and you look at the amount of reclamation activities that have to be done. So I think we're pretty anchored in Wood Buffalo on the civil end, but I think there's a lot of opportunity on a facility maintenance end to grow across Canada, maybe even one day.
If we come back to something you talked about earlier about bringing your own intuition and women's intuition and your skills and experience that you had in the business. So you've close to 1,500 employees, 40% Indigenous, close to 100 First Nations from across the country. How do you translate some of those values? And I've heard you mention before 7 sacred teachings into day-to-day operational performance. Can you talk a little bit about the culture of the organization? Because that's what makes business a success, right? You don't earn your revenue without having something unique that differentiates you.
100%. And I will say for the first half of our life as a business, it still was learning and survival and gaining ground and gaining market share. And then this interesting time came for us as Indigenous entrepreneurs along the same time as Truth and Reconciliation was starting to really stand up throughout Canada, where we had this phenomenal opportunity to embrace our Indigenous culture and bring it within the business. I think it was something we probably already did, but we just didn't label it. And so we decided to start with the 7 sacred teachings. And in our culture, it's the 7 sacred teachings or the 7 grandfather teachings. And they're virtues that through animals are passed down by generations. And in our culture, we talk about 7 generations before and 7 generations after. And we pass down these teachings. And so we decided to bring the teachings into the organization as a bit of a foundation for how we operate our business. So we have teachings such as the wolf teaching. The wolf goes with humility. And, in our business, it's important to stay humble. It's important to stay grounded in community. It's important to never forget about who you are and where you came from and the traditions that you carry as Indigenous people. So we brought that within the business. And then there are other teachings such as courage and truth and honesty. And so that became kind of a guiding principle system for our business. And that really is how we've always delivered our business anyways, right? Is through honesty, through truth, through trust, transparency, integrity. So it was so wonderful to be able to bring our culture in to something that we were already doing and start to communicate with our non-Indigenous employees what it means. And I think it's created this great work environment where people feel like they have a larger purpose than just working in the oil sands, but there is a larger purpose at play there.
Yes. Thank you to Nicole Bourque-Bouchier for sharing your insights with us, and thank you for viewing and listening. Mark your calendars for the upcoming 2026 summit taking place on the 8th of April. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.